Greetings, parasite ecologists. This part always gives me mixed feelings. On one hand, it's a really exciting time because we get to look back on everything that you've accomplished over the course of this video series. Think of all the parasitology knowledge that we've covered. But on the other hand, this is our last video, and that means that it will soon be time for us to say goodbye. And so, at this end point of our video series, I think about what it is that I want you to remember from this course 10 years from now. And I've boiled that down into 6 things. The first one is that parasites are staggeringly diverse. We've studied little bits and pieces of that diversity over this course, but there are still tons of parasites that we've never talked about. Remember that parasites are distributed all across the tree of life in a lot of different clades, and they've evolved 223 separate times. Do you remember this figure from the Weinstein and Kuris paper, which showed us that parasites evolved all across the metazoan tree of life? And that's one way that we can put numbers on the diversity of parasites. They're so diverse that there are literally 223 separate times when parasitism has evolved, which means that each one of those lineages can be really different from the next one. That tells us a little bit about parasite diversity, but it doesn't really bring it home in the same way as thinking about some of the species that we've learned about, and maybe even some of the species that we haven't had time to learn about. Because you might feel like you've learned about dozens and dozens of parasite species, but there are still hundreds of thousands out there in the world that we've never had the opportunity to cover. This diversity, of course, is characteristic of the parasites, and there are just so many different forms, functions, and taxonomic groups of parasites. And so let me tell you about 2 that we haven't yet covered. These guys are some of my favorite parasites that exist on the face of the planet. When I was a student taking parasitology for the very first time, I opened up the textbook to a picture like this one. I was reading through, and I honestly got tears in my eyes learning about these organisms for the first time. These are lacrophagous moths, or tear-drinking moths. They subsist only on tears. It is all they ever eat. And they'll only eat the tears of an endangered mammal called a batang in certain forests of Southeast Asia. Now, one of the reasons that I find parasites really beautiful is that you get stories like this one. Like species that exist entirely, obligately dependent on one resource from one species that is itself endangered and that was rare to begin with before it was endangered. It staggers my mind that there can be a species out in the world that depends entirely on such a teeny, tiny slice of the biological resources of Earth. So there's that on one hand, but there's also how much more metal does it get than drinking the tears of another organism as your sole source of nutrition? It doesn't get any cooler than tear-drinking moths. Until you think about the kangaroo fish. Now, some of you might know the kangaroo because it is a notorious fish. But to look at it, you might find it unassuming, a nondescript 4-inch-long fish. This guy is native to the Amazon River basin, and it's a common river fish. But the kangaroo is more dangerous than it appears. The Latin name for this species is Vandellia serosa, but their common name is the penis fish. Kangaroos are known for swimming up a stream of urine and then becoming lodged in the urethra of men who pee in the Amazon. Don't worry, it's not common, because the kangaroo is not meant to be a parasite of people. It doesn't do the fish any good to be inside of a human urethra. It doesn't mean to be there. It's actually cueing in on the signal of urea in the water. It's meant to be a parasite in the gills of large Amazon fishes. And of course, fishes release their wastes through the gills, which means urea is leaking into the water from the gills of many fish. And the kangaroo essentially is like a little arrow. They find that urea gradient and they swim up it really quickly. And as soon as they find themselves in the gills of a fish, they then release a bunch of spiny little fins and hold themselves in place inside the gill cavity of that fish. Unfortunately, if you're a human peeing into the Amazon, these little kangaroo fish can do the exact same thing. They swim really fast up that urea gradient, right up the stream of urine, into the urethra, and then they release those little spines and they become lodged in the urethra in the process. Now, the fact that there can be such organisms in the world it fills me with awe. There is so much weirdness in the world and so much left to discover, even at the end of this entire video series. Okay, on to the next take-home message. Ecosystems cannot run without their parasites. You learned all about this in the paper that we read entitled A World Without Parasites, Exploring the Hidden Ecology of Infection. But of course, it's also stuff that we've talked about all throughout the course, yeah? We've discussed how, within individual hosts, parasites can compete with one another. Remember when we talked about how, in the gut tract, various intestinal parasites might compete with one another for space. And in the process of that competition, they displace one another or make individuals of other species less abundant or smaller. Remember that parasites can regulate their hosts' populations. Think about the red grouse that can be regulated by their trichostrongylus tenuis nematode parasites, such that the red grouse population booms and busts in a way that it wouldn't in the absence of its parasite. And, beyond just booming and busting, parasites also can cap their hosts' population's density. We've seen how parasites can cause shifts in the composition of a host community because they infect one host but not another, or they infect one host more easily than they infect another. And then, of course, we've seen that manipulative parasites can increase energy flow to predators. Remember, we discussed an example of parasite-increased trophic transmission in the form of Euhaplorchus californiensis, where in the absence of E. californiensis, or Euha, birds have a hard time catching fish, but in the presence of that parasite, it's easy to catch the reckless infected fish. Therefore, there can be a bigger population of birds supported in an ecosystem with the parasite than in an ecosystem without that parasite. Just like Euha, many, many parasites engage in this kind of behavior, parasite-induced trophic transmission or behavioral manipulation. And as a result, we probably have parasites to thank for the large number of apex predators that exist on Earth today. So parasites are not just, in it for themselves. They also have a really important part to play in the ecosystems in which they're embedded, as you've seen. Now, let's talk about our third and fourth take-home messages. Parasites affect history, and history affects parasites. Remember that we covered Yersinia pestis, the Black Death, the bacterium that causes plague? We discussed how it was transmitted to people through the bite of fleas, and you can literally see the impression of the European plagues in the overall abundance of people through time. Take a look at those two divots in the history of human density. You can see that this is human density in the millions on the y-axis and years on the x. Those population contractions changed the course of human history, but there are also other parasites that have impacted the way wars are won or lost, the countries that gain or lose territory. And I'll just mention a couple of examples of parasitic diseases that have shaped historical outcomes. Like smallpox, the viral parasite that was brought to the New World by Cortez and his 600 men, which wiped out the Aztec Empire. And then remember that we covered trypanosomiasis, a parasite that prevented Europeans from bringing their livestock to parts of Central Africa, thus totally changing the trajectory of colonial history in Africa by preventing Europeans from effectively setting up colonies in parts of Africa that were affected by this parasite. But of course, things also happen the other way around, right? History also affects the trajectory of parasites. Remember that there were a bunch of parasites that were brought from Africa to the New World by the trade in enslaved people. And these include Schistosoma mancini, Wuchereria bancrofti, the causative agent of lymphatic filariasis, Onchocerca volvulus, which causes river blindness, and Plasmodium falciparum, the cause of falciparum malaria or cerebral malaria. And these are just the ones that we're sure about. There are lots of other parasites that we think were probably imported into the New World with the trade in enslaved people. Just imagine, even if you only consider the parasitological consequences, how different things would be today had that historical event not shaped and reshaped the geographic distribution of the world's parasites. So parasites affect history, and history affects parasites. On to our fifth take-home message, which is that we have a moral responsibility to address the neglected tropical diseases. Now, I don't often talk about morality in science classes, but I think it's pretty indisputable that there is a moral imperative to deal with the parasitic diseases that currently affect people. I want to show you a little bit of data. These data come from a website called World Mapper, which lets you change the boundaries of countries based on data that are fed into the app. Here's a normal map of the world according to the area of land within each country's boundaries. But I'm going to show you some maps that deform the size of a country so that it correlates to its burden of a particular disease or the value of another variable. This map shows the occurrence of blinding disease, which is mostly made up of trachoma cases across the world. And you can see that the majority of these trachoma cases are in sub-Saharan Africa. Here's malaria, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. HIV, also primarily in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And childhood diarrhea, a little more evenly distributed across the world, but again, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And one last one, rabies, where most of the world's cases are in South Asia with some in sub-Saharan Africa. Now here's another map. It looks real different from the ones you've just seen, so think for just a moment about what this might be plotting. What is more common in North America, Europe, and China than it is in sub-Saharan Africa? The number of physicians. Here's another map with a similar pattern. This one is showing healthcare spending. We have a world in which the vast majority of infectious disease exists in the parts of the world that have the fewest physicians, the least healthcare spending, the lowest GDP, the lowest wealth. So exactly in those parts of the world that are least capable of dealing with parasites, you find all the parasites. It is a shameful state of affairs. We've got drugs for the vast majority of these parasitic diseases, but they're not getting to the people who need them. They're not getting there fast enough, and we're not dealing with the underlying conditions that make it possible for parasitic diseases to persist. And I argue that this is something that we all have a responsibility to address. Luckily, you've now got parasitological training. Will you be a part of the solution? Okay, last take-home message for you. If you remember nothing else from this course, I want you to remember this. Parasites are amazing. They're around us all the time, quietly running the world for better or for worse. Sometimes they cause horrible illnesses in people, and that needs to be addressed. But the vast majority of parasite species are out in the wild, just as much a part of their ecosystems as predators, herbivores, primary producers, or any other kind of consumer. They're abundant, they're important, they're even precious. And so are you for sticking with me through this video series. I hope you enjoyed learning about parasites just as much as I enjoyed telling you about them. And now, go out into the world with a new kind of vision. the ability to see below the surface, to see the netherworld of parasites that lies just beneath everything that is familiar. And then come back and tell me all about it. You'll find my contact details in the video description below. Please keep in touch, and thank you. You want me to hold this thing?
Yeah.
Do I get to do the thing?
You get to do that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
This is a test lecture for parasite ecology. I'm Chelsea Wood, and this is the lecture called Sexual Selection 1. Is this a good position for the music?
Yeah, that's fine. I do a little bit of
Oh, sure.
lint.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. My wife would appreciate it particularly.
Armand, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Chelsea. I'm delighted to participate in this this series of. Delighted to participate.
Keep it.
Okay. Okay, that's what we need to do this a few times.
No, I love